Hi, today we're going to be talking about food aid and how it affects different economies and the environments of the countries who not only receive it, but the ones who give it. Presenting today is going to be Jenna Barnes, Sarah Brinsfield, and Ryan Burnett.
My name is Jenna Barnes, and I'm going to be giving some background information and the impacts that food dumping or food aid can have. So, food dumping is when donor grown food is sent to in need countries to try and help with hunger, which usually occurs in the case of natural disasters or catastrophic events. And it's generally given as a government to government transfer. So, some examples of this are in Haiti, in Indonesia. So in 2010, when the big tsunami hit Haiti, many countries sent rice and other food as a way to help the country recover, but it had negative impacts that will be talked about later. And in Indonesia in 2004, there was a great Indian Ocean tsunami, and it impacted the coastal regions of many countries in that area, but especially Indonesia, and many countries as well sent rice again. But in this case, the rice crops in the inland part of Indonesia were not affected at all and were actually doing really well. So this undermined the local markets. Next, I'm going to be talking about how food dumping impacts the economy, and this is in terms of the economy of the country that receives the food aid. So, in terms of cost, there is an increased dependence on the donor countries for assistance because there's a depression in local markets and discouraging of local production because local production generally tends to be more expensive than food aid, and receiving the food aid therefore creates that dependence on the donor countries. There's also changes in consumption patterns that impacts local agriculture. So when food dumping occurs, local farmers generally are not needed as much in their local markets. And there's also changes in dietary patterns when food is inappropriate for the region. So, if a region is reliant on sorghum or millet and they're given things like wheat, this can kind of change how those people eat their food and what kind of foods they eat, and that in turn really hurts the local economy because they're not able to produce the newer foods per se. So now they're kind of left without people to buy their food. In terms of benefits of this food aid, it's generally only that immediate assistance is provided. So, in the case of monetary donations, the money has to be distributed, and people then go into the markets and purchase food. Whereas in food aid, people get the food and they go home and then they can eat it. So now I'm going to be talking about how food dumping impacts the environment, and once again, this is about the environments of the countries that receive the food aid. So costs, there is an exploitation of natural resources because when food aid is brought in, people generally kind of congregate around these areas, which in turn creates this kind of densely populated sector, and this can impact natural resources, things like there's more emissions and things like that happen, obviously, in bigger cities as opposed to in the country. And there's also changes in grazing and crop patterns of local farmers because their traditional rotations are disrupted, and now they have to try to adapt to this new way of life. There's not really any benefits because there's no environmental impacts that the food aid directly has that would be beneficial or helpful to the environment.
When direct payments are made to countries in need, it doesn't just help them economically, but also environmentally. Allowing farmers to grow their own crops ensures crop cycles are not broken. When the harvest is maintained, the quality of the farmland improves as well, leading to richer soil and cleaner air. Indigenous insects and animals do not have an interruption in their life cycles when farmers maintain their crops and benefit from the harvest and enriched environment. When food dumping takes place, all these benefits are eliminated. When citizens in need are given money rather than food, they have the freedom to choose the products they need. This eliminates the dead weight loss experienced when unnecessary or unused food goes to waste. The product purchased is bought from a local supplier, which stimulates the economy during the time of need. Giving untied aid benefits farmers even more by giving them supplies rather than flooding the market. Give a man to fish and he eats for the night, teach a man to fish and he eats for a lifetime. The same idea can be applied to farmers. Giving them necessary supplies allows nations to become more independent and boost the local economy in the long run. One of the most expensive parts of food aid is transportation. The cost of sending and maintaining produce is eliminated when switching to a strictly monetary policy. Money can reach areas impacted by a natural disaster quickly and efficiently. While it can be dangerous to deliver food to war-torn areas or places ravaged by storms or disease, sending money can avoid these issues. For example, untied aid is sent in forms of debit cards in opposition-controlled refugee camps in Syria where aid workers cannot enter. Turkish vendors were able to participate, and operation costs went down 50% for the entire camp, meaning that they could accept more refugees.
Food dumping creates a negative externality by undermining local industries and harming the environment. However, the externality can be solved by increasing the amount of government expenditures that are spent on untied food. Similarly, taxing the actions of NGOs that are dumping food on impoverished nations can help to incentivize untied aid. Such an action would be considered a Pavlovian tax. Figure 4 indicates that American food aid is directly related to the price of wheat in America. As the price of wheat increases, the amount of food aid will drop inversely. Utilizing untied food aid would give America a safer, cheaper, and more effective method of food aid. The negative impact on local agricultural industries can be seen in Figure 7. From the period of 1970 through 2000, developing countries exported less food as their local industries were destroyed by food aid. Figure 6 indicates that both the richest and poorest nations in sub-Saharan Africa have become more dependent on food aid over time. Similarly, cereal consumption has switched from a hump to a U shape that leaves the middle nations in the same place that they started.
The fight against world hunger has no explicit answer, but does have remedies that are yet to be implemented. Currently, a company called Manna is creating packets which do not require water, cooking, or refrigeration with a 2-year shelf life. It is made with fortified peanut paste, and one sack contains 500 calories. Current food aids such as wheat and rice have a relatively low nutrition level, whereas therapeutic food helps combat malnutrition and hunger concurrently. Therapeutic food allows mothers to feed children without checking into a feeding center, which is a prominent issue for citizens who cannot mobilize to accept aid. Lipid-based nutrient supplements are also being designed for at-risk toddlers or mothers breastfeeding and are roughly half the size of the humanitarian supply ration with 255 calories. Sending vitamins and minerals also could help combat malnutrition and assist with rounding diets out when aid is limited.
Food dumping has a direct negative impact on the communities that were meant to be served by food aid. Over time, evidence has shown that local industries are stunted and poorer nations are kept in poverty. While providing food to needy countries is important, untied food aid is a better way to support these countries. By simply giving cash to needy countries, the goal of food aid is accomplished while also protecting local industries. Untied aid also benefits the environment by reversing the negative impact of food dumping that occur when farmers begin to neglect their fields. Food aid has become ineffective from decades of food dumping, and by switching to untied aid, poorer nations will be able to feed their people and protect local industries.